Morning, welcome to the Business Brunch. Now, we've all been approached on LinkedIn by somebody that we don't know, and we accept that connection potentially when we shouldn't, and then within five minutes or 5 seconds you've got a sales pitch, and it's something that most of us probably don't respond well to. It's not the approach that many of us expect, but it happens. Now, within the B4 community, we've got all sorts of sizes of organizations, large and small. And we wanted to have a conversation with Nadine Hatten of Nielsen and Frank Nigriello of Unipart. Nadine, sorry, it's Nielsen IQ now, isn't it? Sorry.
It's Nielsen IQ, yes.
Apologies. And we also got Alison Haill representing the SME business community from Oxford Professional Consulting to talk about expectations when it comes to dealing with larger organizations and how we need to maybe look at how their world works and managing our expectations and some tactics for engaging with them and working with them going forward. Alison, I know you've got a few points you wanted to discuss on this particular topic. You've had experience of dealing with larger organizations. Has it always been easy or difficult for you, or a bit of both?
Well, it's been a voyage of discovery. I've run my business for the last 22 years, so I've learned the hard way because nobody told me how to do it. And one of the things that I have had to deal with is the kind of what seems to an independent or an SME as the obvious way to do things. You have a discussion, you maybe have several discussions at a sales meeting. The corporate client says, yes, we want to go ahead. And as an SME, you might think, okay, well, we're going to have the contract and the payment, and it's all going to be done, and we'll be paid pretty smartly. But there's the preferred supplier list you might have to get on first. There's the purchase order, and you might think when you filled in the purchase order that it's done, but no, it maybe has to be ticked and passed by several people, and then there's the actual getting the payment. And so these are all things that I've learned gradually. But if you're a newbie at this kind of thing, you might be really distressed to find it takes such a long time from getting agreement to actually starting the work and then getting the money. So
yes, and we were talking off camera, Nadine, about how it works at Nielsen IQ in terms of payment. And you're saying, obviously, a global organization, you've got fixed processes in place and they're not flexible. And it's in Nielsen IQ, then things like payments 60 days is standard, and that's how it works.
Absolutely, and it is a diktat from the top. So doesn't matter how small or large the organisation you're dealing with, there are a set of rules against which we have to adhere to as a commercial organisation, and there's no flex in that. And in actual fact, what will probably distress an awful lot of people, payment terms seem to be getting longer, not shorter, certainly amongst an awful lot of corporates. So I think as a smaller or any kind of business, you just need to understand up front what that term of engagement is, and be prepared to acknowledge that that's how the relationship will operate, because continuing to try and chip away at that will not prove to be successful and could potentially lose you a sale if that's the piece that you're hung up on. So I think you need to take a view at the outset. Are you prepared to accept that term, or would you be better spending your time elsewhere?
And would you say all organizations of your size are upfront and clear about signposting things like payment terms?
It's certainly my experience. I mean, we deal with an awful lot of very large organisations, and often we will get a document through to sign to say that we accept those terms before we even get any kind of RFP or opportunity or brief to even pitch. We have to agree to the terms before we can even do that. That seems to be the way of the world these days.
I think that's really important, Nadine. It's a really good point. If people come with clarity as to what the relationship's going to look like, then moving forward is very easy. It's when there are different expectations that you find it becomes difficult after service delivery, or when people expect to get paid, and because those things weren't made clear up front. I think having a really good set of T's and C's as to what it's like to do business with us is incredibly valuable, and that extends, way beyond just payment terms. I mean, that extends to the behaviors of both parties during the relationship. So I think that's a very good thing to have, and I think we have that, and we try and use that. But Richard, I think one of the points that I'd like to make is that expectation it occurs far earlier than when you're getting to contract stage, and it's at the point where there is often an expectation that when you meet someone, just because you've met them, there's a good opportunity to go on and say, hey, can we do business with you? And, that's just not how things are done. Or your point about, we made a connection on LinkedIn. So, hey, thanks for connecting. Would you like to buy this thing that I've got? And unfortunately, that doesn't happen that often. I know most people are far more sophisticated now than doing that, but it does happen from time to time. And I think that's really unfortunate. Having run an SME and worked in large corporates, I've hunted and been hunted. So I know that experience only too well. And I think if SMEs are going to penetrate or get into or work with, form partnerships with large organizations, they need to really do their homework and think about, well, do I understand this organization, what it's trying to do? Do I understand how I can really add value to them? Not how I add value generically, but how do I add value to this company particularly, and how can I help them with a problem? And then how do I express that in a way that makes it really compelling and that they trust me to do it? Because large organizations are most often used to dealing with large organizations. So there's a level of trust you need to build up with a smaller company and in the principle that you meet. And I think that takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, I completely agree, Frank. Your point is really well made on the research the business in the first place. So I can't tell you how many emails I get referencing a business that has nothing to do with Nielsen IQ. And just by example, people assume they know that we're market research, and they think because we're market research, we're out on the street corner collecting questionnaires and we need a CATA unit. And that is not the research that we're into at all. And the number of emails I get saying, oh, we'd like to introduce you to our new technology surrounding CATA units. And we're not even in that space. And it's unfortunate because you're then just not going to take it any further forward. So whoever's going to, honestly, I cannot stress the importance of really doing the background research to understand what it is that the business actually engages in.
And this is where these sorts of meetings, business brunches, and the dinners we used to have, or the Friday meetings that we have, the house meetings, are so really important, because this is an opportunity for someone to meet up and have a conversation, not a sales pitch, but have a conversation and say, well, what are you doing? And I remember when I was running my own business, the times I would meet people, we'd have a conversation about something, and it would come to a point that related to the products or services I was selling. And I'd say, well, did you find that a problem? And what sort of problems do you find with that? Because I have a lot of clients that I'm dealing with who do that sort of training or that sort of, what problems do you have? And okay, well, if I could solve that problem, would that be interesting to you? Should we have another conversation about your particular area and how I might be able to help you? In that sense, you actually understand what's bothering the person. And if your prospect that you're talking to at the time, the person becomes a prospect, is at a stage where they're not willing to pursue that, or they don't think it's a real problem, or they don't want to pursue it, then drop it. Then okay, that's fine. Let's not pursue something if someone's told you I'm not interested, because I get dozens of people writing to me every week. Nadine, I'm sure you do as well.
Yeah.
Trying to sell me something, and something I don't want, as Nadine said. Things we don't even use.
Yeah, and I come back to the point on researching the business. It's not just about what you do, but it's really important, and even more so in today's competitive age, to have a look at what values that business holds. So, for example, in the industry that I'm in, and I'm sure in every industry at the moment, sustainability is huge, and saving the planet and everything. And as a business, we have made a certain amount of commitments to Oxfordshire Council, for example, around what we're doing for sustainability. So if you approach us and recognise and reference, it doesn't have to be the first thing, but you align to the similar set of values, then you're going to appeal in a different way. So there's the hardcore business, but then there's the softer element around it, which is becoming much broader than it ever has been before. And so I just come back to the point I made initially. When you research, look at all aspects to ensure that you're thinking about the cultural fit in terms of what you do and what the business you're pitching to or initially engaging with might appeal to.
I think that's really, really important, Nadine, really important. The other thing about being in a network like this is you kind of get to know the people that you're in the network with, and you develop those relationships. If you're sitting in a large or medium or small company, and you then have a need, and you've come to know people who do that, you're more likely to pick up the phone to someone and say, you know what, I've got this problem with intellectual property, and I know you're an intellectual property lawyer, and we've met before. Could you give me some advice on this? And those conversations are more likely to turn into a transaction, a commercial relationship, than some hard sell, because the people have taken time and they've already made that kind of cultural or relationship connection. They understand each other, they understand where they're coming from, and that trust is already building there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I just ask? I mean, you've done the due diligence, looked at the company that you're hoping to supply. You supplied them. You've got paid. You jumped through all the hoops. How do you stay connected with that organisation? I mean, obviously, appreciating large organisations, there's changes in personnel, which can ultimately you pick up the phone in 2 months' time and want to supply the same product again. It's gone. How do you try and build a longer term relationship with large organisations so you've not put all that hard work in for just one supply, for example? How do you make them a long term customer?
Well, gaining feedback at the point of delivering the project or the product, whatever it is extremely important, and particularly asking the client or ourselves to be really candid. You don't want to sugarcoat it, because if it wasn't exactly what you wanted, then frankly you're not going to get more business. So really be persistent around the feedback, and most people are pretty diligent at providing feedback. And then just seek to see if there are other introductions that can be made within the business off the back of the product or project you've sold in, and try and utilise the department or the person to spread that word. If you go and approach somebody else without referencing that person, that doesn't always work, because they will always come back and try and find the feedback from that initial person. So I think you can organically grow from that perspective.
Yes, and I think it's also important, as you say, to be really sincere about your wish to have the real feedback, because if as an independent or as a supplier, you're just asking for the feedback in a kind of by rote. But if you're really keen you show your keenness to get the real candid opinions from the client, I think that also goes a certain way to show that you are trustworthy, and not just in producing a good project, but really wanting to learn how to make it the next one even more useful. So I think you do your credibility a favour in that space, wouldn't you say?
I think that's a really, really good point. I recall when working as a consultant, there were two things I always tried to do. And one was to honestly, as I was working with my client, listen to what they were saying about their organization and where there were other issues that emerged, other things that we might be able to help with. And then in getting an assessment of how well we did, be able to say, well, I recall you mentioning you had some issues with this. Is that something you think that you might like to address next? Because if you found this to be a good situation, then maybe we could help you with that. So it's always kind of listening and really trying not just trying to on-sell, but trying to help as genuinely as you can. And the second point I make, knowing more than one person in the organization, because the person you work with, your sponsor, your coach, or your client, can move on. And the next person who comes into that role doesn't know who you are. And why should they do business with you? So, it's trying to make sure that you have some reach in the organization. You get to know a few people so that you can honestly try and help the organization. And after all, that's really what delivering a service or a product is about, is trying to help your client, not just doing the transaction.
Absolutely. And then you really do become a preferred partner, don't you? Because you're seen to be valuable in all kinds of different ways. People can contact you with a question, or, who do you know who might help with this? And you become a go-to. There's a couple of things that I wanted to mention, if I may. There's a woman who does very good legal advice specifically for small independents wanting to work with big companies. And she used to work with Disney and big companies herself. And she certainly says around the contracting, she says, don't, and I'm a member of her group, that's how I know what she says. And she says, don't assume that your corporate client won't be prepared to discuss contracting arrangements. So do ask for specific things that you would like to have. And if they say no, of course, you have to accept it. But sometimes there will be a bit of movement. Would you agree that it's fair enough for people to ask, as long as they don't argue the toss too heavily?
Well, I mean, it's always fair to ask, but I just think you have to be careful not to make it an expectation, because I would say, and also the person you're dealing with is unlikely to have the influence to support that decision to change the contractual terms. And it will probably be an escalation process, which will go, certainly within my business, that would go right up through global. And you probably won't hear back for several months. So is that really the route that you want to take?
Yeah, well, I think that's really useful for people to hear, because it's going to save them time if they just accept what's on offer. The other thing I would say is, in my own experience, that sometimes, for instance, my company provides coaching, and sometimes we would get a request for coaching from an HR department in a large company. And I would say to any coach or consultant, get on the phone as soon as possible. I'm talking about pandemic lockdown situations, but, have a real conversation with that person as soon as possible, because what they ask for may not be absolutely what's going to be the best solution for the challenge that they're facing. And if you can get in conversation with them, you can ask them really useful questions, find out what the real situation is, and perhaps propose an even better solution, which might be cheaper for them. It might be more expensive, but it would be you using your expertise for the sake of the client, and not just saying, yes, I'll do you 6 sessions because that's what you asked for, and it will be blah price. So that's just a practical.
Alison, you mentioned the point about asking, could I deliver more or do more? I'll just share a story with you very quickly. I was asked by a colleague of mine at Syed Business School to help him with an assignment he had with 2 very large global companies that had been working in a supply chain relationship for 20 years. They went back, a long-term relationship. And it started with the dinner. We sat at the dinner, and I said to the client company, so the client and the supplier, I won't mention who they are. I said to the client company, so just tell me, so what are the kind of 3 big challenges you've got moving forward that would make a step change difference to your business? And the guy was very erudite. It gave me a very good description. At which point, afterwards, the people from the supplier organization said, you never told us that. We didn't know that. And we could help with some of those things because we have these facilities. And I thought, you guys have been in a relationship for 20 years, massive companies with relationship managers, all the infrastructure in place. And as a supplier, you never asked that question of your customer as to what their big strategic priorities were, where they needed to go. And the supplier said to me, quite frankly, that's not the nature of our relationship. Our relationship is about, we deliver a service and, we transact on that.
Ask questions.
That's all we do. And I think that's just, that's not really doing your job, is it? If you're a supplier to anyone, it's about saying, well, how else could we help? Or what could we just? I think it's a really valid question.
Right.
You look as if you've got something to say, Nadine, about that one.
You carry on, Nadine.
No, I'm completely in agreement. I mean, it's like a missed opportunity for 20 years, isn't it? I mean,
it does show, though, doesn't it, that sometimes having an independent person in, they will ask different questions than the one who's been a partner for so long, because you get in your kind of comfort zone of relationship, don't you?
Yeah.
And those questions are not asked.
And familiarity just breeds assumptions, really, in many ways.
Yes.
And I just close. I mean, what actually, one of the catalysts for actually having this conversation, I was telling Alison about somebody in our network that really hadn't managed to understand what you guys have to go through. I'm not saying a traumatic experience working for Nielsen IQ and Unipart, but trying to really put themselves in your shoes and understanding what's realistic, I suppose. You touched on being patient and having to understand that there are protocols that you guys have to go through to get contracts awarded. I think you really do need to manage your own expectations and understand the challenges that people like Nadine and Frank have to face. It's not all about you, and ultimately, it might sound harsh, but you probably need them more than they need you. That might be harsh, but I think that's the reality. And I think you have to learn, as I say, be patient and understand the challenges that these guys are facing. Is that a fair thing to say to end on?
Yeah, I do. And I just come in circling right back to the beginning when you commented on LinkedIn. That LinkedIn actually is a very useful tool, because if somebody connects with me via LinkedIn first before they send me an email, I'm much more likely to engage. Whereas if somebody just sends me, a cold call email, I'm far less likely to pick that up, because I just get this email and it's, you're going to press delete because it's lengthy. So I think you have to think.
Sounds like one of mine, Nadine.
Yeah. It's more like, what's the engagement strategy? So really do think that through in terms of but to your point as well, you can't connect and then immediately follow up with a big sales pitch.
But then also and not get disappointed if, for example, someone come back to you within a couple of weeks, because that they might have a large department to run, and it's as I say, it's more about, you have to be patient about their priorities as well.
And I think Richard, there's a couple of points that, first of all, when I ran a small business, I made all the decisions. I was in charge and I could do what I wanted. In a large organization, working in a large organization, very few decisions do I ever make on my own. There's much more of a consensus among a number of people. So probably more than one person is to be involved in agreeing to do something. The second point I'd make is that large companies are almost always looking to develop and expand what they'll think of as their ecosystem. And their ecosystem exists around not just their supply chain, the people they're doing business with today, but the people they want to know around who they might need to do business with in future, or who could help in future in certain areas. So they have those relationships and they have that infrastructure built, if only on a relationship basis. They may not have bought a service yet. And so it's really valuable for SMEs to get to know the companies they want to do business with. And the SME should choose ahead of time, as I did when I ran my business. This is the sort of company I want to do business with, and this is the sort of company I don't, because they don't fit in with the way I see things or my culture. So, it's a two-way decision there. But if you have identified the sort of companies you want to do business with, then it's about building that relationship with the people in there, where when it's appropriate and when you've thought about it and you've done the research, you can share with them how you could add value to their business.
Very much potentially big prizes, but a much longer game.
Yeah.
Right. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Alison, for joining us with Nadine and Frank. Great to see you all, and we look forward to seeing you soon, hopefully in the flesh.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.